Hi, this is part two of the Second Persian War. We're going to focus specifically on the Battle of Salamis and whether or not um, the Battle of Salamis broke the sort of back of the Persians, prior to the Battle of Salamis. Uh, so we're looking at the second phase of the war, where if you listen to part one, it would have been on the Battle of Thermopylae and briefly on a little bit on Artemisium. After the defeats of the Spartiates and the final 300, the Persians continue to sort of move southwards. They sack Athens and then move back towards Thebes. But during this time, the naval campaign has circled through the south of sort of the Attica mainland to fight in this bay here. Now, if you recall from classes, you should have looked a little bit at the Delphic oracle, and it refers to divine Salamis. And so this, in part, is referenced by the Delphic oracle. During this time, as a preface to the battle, the Athenians evacuate from Athens to sort of this Piraeus area, given that they know from the defeat of Thermopylae and the number of troops, there's no point trying to hold Athens. So they evacuate the entire population of Athens to Piraeus, and also the entire male, well, the men who are able to fight onto the triremes in the Bay of Salamis in preparation for the Persian fleet to arrive. So this battle is fought over 480 to 479. In terms of like final statistics, we'll look at how the battle plays out. But in terms of final statistics, we're looking at about 40 Greek ships, triremes that are destroyed, as opposed to the Persian 200 to 300. I mean, the statistics vary, and it's hard to sort of get an exact figure, but most ancient and modern interpretations are between 200 and 300 ships. And the Immortals, you can't see it really in that map, but on one of the later maps, I'll show you the Silitalia, which is an island that the 10,000 Immortals are actually put on in order to sort of any Greeks who wash up on that boat, on that beach, their job was to sort of execute them. So in terms of the statistical evidence, the Greeks specifically, we're looking at roughly 378, or 371 to 378 ships. And Herodotus is great because he actually goes through and numbers them. He identifies how many ships are from each of the locations, and you can see it on the grid at the bottom left. Bottom right, sorry. Over to the map, and we'll sort of run through this as we go through the whole process. You can see that the Athenians sit on the left flank. The combined, so a majority of these combined states sit in the Allies section, and a Spartan-controlled fleet. I mean, the Spartans only have 16 ships themselves, but a Spartan-controlled fleet has the right flank, and they set it up almost in phalanx formation. And you have to remember at this time, Eurybiades is Spartan in control of the fleet, and we've focused so heavily on Athens being this naval superiority, but from the Battle of Thermopylae, this strong Spartan leadership, the mentality has prevailed. So they've actually so all of the combined Greek states have placed Eurybiades as the sort of in command of the fleet, and Themistocles is sort of like second in command, but primarily in control of this Athenian fleet. On the other side, you find a series of Persian leaders with one Greek female leader. And this is an interesting point because Xerxes actually selects Artemisia as in charge of his fleet, or at least the sort of combined non-Persian ships. She's in control of that because she knows this area very well. And she's from a city-state called Halicarnassus, which just happens to be where Herodotus is from as well. And so Herodotus, when he describes a lot of the Greek fleet, he references Artemisia, the female Greek that leads Xerxes' fleet, and that she is actually the best part of the Persian fleet. I mean, he's obviously taking a dig at the Persians, saying that they're useless, and a Greek female is actually more important than the Persian commanders at all. Their fleet, we're looking at anywhere between 900 to 1207, and modern estimates sort of put it at between 300 and 600. Given the losses of 200 to 300, we know that there's still a fleet, so it's probably more likely that it's sitting in the 450 to 600 range, although it's interesting to see that the ancient estimates seem to be significantly higher than that. So in terms of the Battle of Salamis, we've got Athenians on the left, Spartans probably on the right. We're going based on a variety of different information here. And the Greeks formed two narrow ranks. Okay? So the point from sort of Salamis Bay across here is too thin for multiple layers at some point. So in here in particular, the Athenian fleet has to sail around to the side, and they're able to sort of pincer and create like a push through down this area here, while the rest of the Persian fleet sit in waiting because it's actually too narrow to sail the fleet in. And so again, the Greeks have picked a strategic victory where they can't, strategic point, because the Persians can't actually sail their entire potentially 900 ship fleet into this bay. So it's almost like Battle of Thermopylae all over again. Funnel them into a very narrow point and then slowly knock them out, and then wait for reinforcements to come in and repeat. And because it's Spartans at the head, they create a phalanx formation of boats. And so if you remember back to the Delphic Oracle prophecy, it says the wooden wall shall not fall. And the way Eurybiades used that is a wooden wall of boats. And so he creates the phalanx formation in boats. The Persian fleet, on the other hand, has an Egyptian contingent, which is probably one of their best fleets, is sitting off to the side, which, I mean, tactically looking at it, I think that was a huge mistake, and it was probably very costly for the Persians, given that they're the best fleet and the best designed boats don't actually get involved in the fight. Xerxes also puts some of his immortals onto this island in the hope that if there's any sort of Greeks washing up from this battle that don't appear in this area here, they'll wash up into this island and the immortals will finish them off. So in terms of the outlook of the battle, I'll be sort of talking over this and giving a little bit of information that you'll see on later slides. So if you're wondering where this information comes from, it's further on in the video. So the actual battle doesn't take place until daylight. And in this sort of ridge here, we're waiting until dawn, and then the Persians start to push in. And as the Persians are pushing in, there's almost like this echo of voices across the ocean, and they're singing this chant of fighting for your country. So psychologically, the Greeks are building themselves up, and it's for the Persians, you can see this very united front. As the Persian fleet comes in, it's sort of in this staggered layer, as opposed to the Greek single formation here. And the three boats, mainly Athenian-led, then sort of circle up and around to be able to almost pincer this Persian fleet. The Greeks start to pull back, knowing that the tide's going to change, and they're going to get this sort of gust of wind to boost them forward. They pull right back and lure the Persians into this almost choke point, right? And at dawn, there's this sort of push gust of wind, and the Greeks are able to push forward and take out the first sort of rank of Persian ships. And this sort of demoralizes around the side and back, and the Greeks continue to push forward. And keep an eye on the sort of northern section here, because you'll see as the Athenian boats circle back around, they almost make this pincer point, and triremes are designed very strong at the front, so they're able to sort of hit the sides of these boats and create a choke point, right? And they continue to crush, and using sort of the tactics of Battle of Marathon, they continue to crush and push in. So Athenian and, well, all Greek soldiers, but mainly sort of Spartans, fill out the ranks of on deck. And as they push into these triremes, they often jump on board and sort of execute as many barbarians, as many Persians as they can. And as the Persian fleet pulls back, the Battle of Salamis is over. And so we know statistically that there's about 200 to 300 of the Persian fleet that is destroyed, and 40 of the combined Greek ships that are destroyed. So as they pull further back out, and the video doesn't show this, but as they continue to pull out, the combined Greek forces hold this choke point here, and then eventually, when they can see them in full flight, so they're running away, they dispatch Spartiate soldiers onto this island to execute the remaining immortals. So that's just a very brief overview. We'll look at the specific evidence now. So, according to Herodotus, and we know that they're putting out to sea, the barbarians immediately attack them. So the Greeks actually lured them into this point, and then immediately the Persians view this as a sign of retreat, and they start to pull in. And they pull themselves into this very shallow bay, but a strategic chokehold. And you can sort of see it better here. We've got the single layer of Salamis, so the Greek boat, and this is like this flooding of Persians. Strategically, though, in this situation, as soon as you start to put pressure on this front row, the front row starts moving into the back row, and then eventually you're going to have this push right up against the shoreline, and you're going to sink a lot of boats that way. So just the sheer number it becomes like a crush. So the Greeks appeared to back their ships in fear, according to Herodotus. According to Plutarch, this was to gain better position until early morning wind, and that's what I said before. So they're waiting for that sort of wind to pick up so that they can not only row forward, but the sail on the trireme then picks up the wind as well, so they can torpedo into the sides of these, or into the front of these Persian boats that are not designed for sort of collision warfare. So the Persians were disorganized and pushing the retreating Greeks. A single vessel shot forward, and you can guess who that is, Eurybiades, to pincer the Persian vessel. And as soon as that Persian vessel is almost split in half, all of the Greeks rush forward. and it completely disorders the Persian battle lines. So that's sort of like a good summary of the triremes, but I strongly recommend looking at additional research on these, because they're almost like battering rams with wooden, almost like a ram that pierces through the sides of boats, and if going fast enough, actually splits and sinks the boats in one go. Plutarch believes that Ariobiges was killed in this engage. And that's one of the leaders of the Persian fleet. So he attempted to board theirs, ran at him with their pikes, and thrust him into the sea. His body, as it floated amongst other shipwrecks, was known to Artemisia and carried to Xerxes. So Artemisia actually watches the death of this Arimenes, carries that information to Xerxes, and Xerxes sort of like completely thrown off by this. We also know that Xerxes is watching from the mountaintop. So the rest of his sort of armed, his soldiers are standing along this line here and this line here, watching the whole sort of battle take part. And it's recorded. I mean, I don't know how accurate this is, but according to Herodotus, he describes it as, "My men have become women and my women men. So Artemisia is the greatest part of my fleet, and all of my men," and remember, this is a very sort of sexist, patriarchal society, where women is seen as feeble and sort of like emotional. And so what he's saying is that they're actually so scared that they're starting to run away. So the Persian fleet then withdrew to the harbour. The Athenian General Aristides took a detachment to this island with a lot of Spartiate soldiers and finished off the immortals. So sitting on this mountain, Xerxes watches the entire sort of fleet fight play out and realizes how much the Greeks were prepared for this and how little impact he did, and he's embarrassed. And so Xerxes beheads the Phoenicians, who you can see in here are actually sort of Persian-controlled Greeks. Okay, and so he beheads all of the Phoenicians, and puts to death these Phoenicians, according to Diodorus, who are chiefly responsible for beginning the flight to the runaway, and threatened to visit upon the rest the punishment they deserved. And I mean, this is a big mistake, because you've just beheaded some of your strongest and most capable leaders, and then the rest of the sort of the soldiers are looking at going, well, if he's prepared to kill them, I mean, he's prepared to kill all of us. So funnily enough, the rest of the Phoenicians just left to Asia. They took their boats and rowed them home. And so not only have they lost 200 to 300 boats in the battle, but the entire Phoenician surviving army has now just upped and left. Okay, now just as a final analysis, in terms of the Battle of Salamis, it is a significant defeat for the Persians. However, the Persians do not surrender. Xerxes leaves, and he takes a lot of his fleet back home, back to Persia. But he leaves one of his generals, Mardonius, and a contingency to fight the Spartans in Plataea, which will be the part 3. So although it does not officially defeat the Persians, the Battle of Salamis sparks almost like a crippling of the Persians. Most of the Persians retreat home, either retreat home or flee the Persian army completely. A lot of the Ionian states and Phoenicians return home. So what you need to sort of decide is, ultimately, does Salamis break the backs of the Persians? And then it's almost like a waiting game, and it's a systematic knocking off of all of the Persians that are left. Or, officially, does the Persian War continue? And so the Battle of Plataea sparks the end of the Persian War. Again, it's something that you sort of need to put into perspective. Sparta is the Battle of Thermopylae is a psychological and sort of devastating ego defeat of the Persians, and it's something that remains with them for forever, which is why a lot of the sort of boats, and you can see it in this scene especially, they're using Spartan tactics, they're equipped with Spartan weaponry, the flags on the triremes are Spartan crests. They have that psychological warfare from Thermopylae, but ultimately this is, an epic defeat for the Persian fleet. One that sort of, it destroys the morale, the sort of the Persian desire to continue fighting. Whereas Plataea officially ends the war.